Hey, so we are doing a how to assemble a short block DIY video. And it's a really only DIY if you also happen to have a 1-ton Atlas press. If you don't, this isn't for you. Doing a 385 XP for the guys at the Blue Sols. They had a local guy putting a crank in it, bearings, seals, gaskets, and we're probably going to port the top end. These are great Sols stock. They're even greater ported. So we've got a new set of bearings for the flywheel. We've got a 6203 C3 Italian made SKF. You can see it says Italia. It says Italy on it. Good bearings. And then on these for the flywheel side, they are proprietary. So you got to get it from the Husqvarna. And it's really largely just proprietary because it has the seal in it. The ID and the OD are almost identical. According to my micrometer, they are identical for the ID and the OD. They are a tad wider than the stock 6203 C3, but whatever. You pay your $30, you put a nice quality bearing in it, you don't worry about it. So I've already done the prep work. We've got them clean. Gasket surfaces are nice and clean. We have, when I'm rebuilding cases like this, I often will use a new gasket and I will still skim it with some Durco. You don't want to go heavy on it. You don't want to be obnoxious. Just get your fingers all slappered up in it and wipe the gasket down real nice. Just because that's going to take up any imperfections. And the last thing you want to do is to go through all this hassle and this effort and put the whole thing together to find you have a case leak. It's worth having a touch of Durco on the seam. So that's my opinion. So the way I start these is I will do bearings and cases, then I will do crank together and marry it all. The one thing you never want to do when you're doing this is try to use the K screws to run everything in together. That's a bad idea. You're going to break something, I promise. So don't do it. So let's get started. We will grab PTO bearing. The biggest thing on some of these Huskies when they have the seal in the bearing, you want the seal out. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. So don't do that. Let me point you over here. All right. So here we are. We have our flywheel side. Seal out. On these, where they pass through, there's not a lip or anything for the bearing to rest on. I will oftentimes just push them straight in from the top. Seal up. The one thing you never want to do is try to drive this in sideways. You want to drive it in square and straight. Otherwise, you're going to wreck it. I happen to have a bunch of old sockets that I turned down to common sizes. You want to start light pressure. Make sure the bearing is going in. So slow and steady is going to win this race here. All right. Okay, it's going in straight. Then you can start to apply the pressure where you need it. All right. And it's better to stop and check your progress. The last thing you want to do is go too far and ruin it. We are spot on. All right, if you hook your peepers in there, you take a look, we're nice and flush. That's where we want to be. So now we do likewise with our flywheel side bearing. Notice it's got the lip inside, so you can't just press it straight through. You've got to press it in from one side. These nice bearings don't have any shields. They have retainers. Sometimes when you buy aftermarket bearings, you will find that they have like an oil shield and they're packed full of grease. If that's your scenario, pop that off, clean all that crap out. Same deal, make sure it's in there and started square. Make sure you've got the right stuff in place. You want to be careful when you're pressing against cases if you don't have something that's exactly right for what you're pushing against. You don't want to break anything. Pop the lock. Bring it down slow. We're not in the right spot. Now we're in the right spot. Yep, steady pressure. All right. So you can see that one did not start in flat. So we have to make an adjustment to our process here. Because the last thing you want to do is drive this thing in off center and then break your case. There we go. Nice, firm, even seat. All right. We didn't need that anyway. Edit. Okay. So now we've got bearings in our cases. Our gasket is in place and it's nice and lubricated up. We grab our fresh new crankshaft. This is a used crankshaft going in the saw form. The issue with the saw is this bearing decided to grenade and it ate up the piston in the top end. The cylinder magically, I'll have to look at it more closely, but Scott told me that the bore is fine and we're going to do a band cut anyway, so probably reusable, which is amazing. I gave this a thorough check. I looked at every roller from both sides, and this crank has gotten very few hours on it. It's good to go. I did get a little bit of flash rusting, but that wiped up and cleaned up with alcohol and a Scotch-Brite. Not Scotch-Brite, shop towel. So, you want to be really careful pressing against a crank like this, because if you're pressing on both ends, you'll notice the pressure is offset by the connecting rod pin. It's almost like you're trying to pinch these together. You want to be real careful. You want to take it easy. And you want to make sure you're putting it in the right way. I can't tell you how many cases I've tried to put together and I put the PTO side out the flywheel case half. I have to double check myself. So, I often will, well, my gasket's already started on the flywheel side. Flywheel has the coned in. They typically will go in just a smidge. Nope. Yep. If you have a 1-ton arbor press like I do with a medium-ish throat, sometimes you kind of have to play Tetris to get everything in there and lined up. Okay, so that started. If I can keep applying light pressure, I'll keep going here. If you want to be extra cautious, you can apply heat to the bearing pockets and freeze your crank, and that will make it, you can almost slip fit it. That's how I did it for a long time before I got an arbor press. All right, so that's in. I don't know if you noticed, but I was being very cautious to make sure the connecting rod stayed out the top where the cylinder would be. Next thing we do is apply our flywheel or PTO side. Again, a set of Tetris. All right. This is the annoying part of putting a short block together, is keeping everything in line. You. Yep. Really? Are we not going to fit? Okay, hold on here. What if we go this way? Oh my gracious. Alright. It is just wanting to be a pain in the butt. Alright. So now at this position you want to make sure you are keeping everything lined up. Alright. Okay. So, now that we're here, and the bolts will reach through, this is the part that's annoying. They keep spinning like that, and it's enough to make a guy a little bit crazy. No thanks. I don't want to switch to extreme battery saver. I should probably hurry this up. You can do just 1 or 2, or if you've got all 6 of them handy, you can do all 6 case bolts. You want to make sure your gaskets and everything is in place. And again, you're not pulling them together. With the case bolts, but you can rely on them to keep everything lined up. All right, so that one's there and started. Because it has been a little bit of a finagler, I'm just visually checking to make sure the gasket is in place for every bolt I drop through. And I'm not cranking down on these. I'm just getting them started. Oop, that one went a little bit far. Okay. The one I dropped goes here. Excellent. All right. So now we go back to our jig. We get everything back lined up where it goes. That just barely fits. Make sure we're on the bearing, the outer race of the bearing. Okay, now see here? I don't know if you can see that. Connecting rod tried to get out over in between the cases. That's extra no good. Just like when installing the bearings, steady pressure. Do a visual check, make sure, yep, our gasket is in place where it should be. The other thing is, even with pressure on it, you should be able to easily, my fat elbow out of the way, spin the crank. I don't know if you can see that. That's actually spinning. So that's good. All right. So now that you've gotten everything pressed together, you can go about the next step. Our oil pickup tube is still where it needs to be, thank goodness, because that was one thing I didn't check. Go back through and tighten these all up. Torque them appropriately with a torque wrench or whatever satisfies you to be torqued. And that's how you put together a short block. Well, I went to spin it to show you. So this is an interesting point to make here. Sometimes when you put them together like this, where you're pressing them together, the crank might be a little tighter on one bearing versus the other. So right now it doesn't spin. Even though it's spun in the vise, I can turn it by hand, but it's still, you don't want that. Spins a little bit easier. Using a dead blow, right? Just taps. Give it a tap on the other side. There we go. So that's getting easier to turn. Put some oil in those bearings. Work it over when we have better leverage on it with the clutch or the flywheel. And we'll be good to go.